Thank you for coming. I think some more people are going to join, but we're delighted to be able to have a kind of free conversation with Bryan Christy, who is, well, as Nancy Bohnen says, the most interesting man in the world. Bryan is founded and is the former head of Special Investigations at National Geographic. He's written extraordinary pieces for National Geographic. He started out as a lawyer working in international law, including, didn't you do something with North Korea? North Korea.
There was an effort to sell light water nuclear reactors at a time when, probably shouldn't have been done.
Well, maybe that's what drove you out of the law and into investigative reporting, which was a boon for the rest of us. But he's done tremendous work on all sorts of areas of investigative reporting involving wildlife trafficking, with reptiles, with rhinoceros, with elephants. He's won awards, and he was the Rolex Explorer of the Year. I'm not entirely certain what that is, but I think it's, and but it's, so it's, I'm just delighted that he's here with us. And if it wasn't enough that he had done all of that, he also has now written, he wrote a nonfiction book, The Lizard King, which is terrific. And he has now written his first novel, which of course makes the rest of us feel like we've done not too much with our lives. You know, we've just been sort of sitting, well, Bryan's been out there doing everything. So he is, but his novel is absolutely terrific. And we'll talk about it in 3 weeks, but it's In the Company of Killers. And it's also in the sort of, the kind of thriller / espionage / environmental novel that the world needs, I think, because it's very, very compelling, but it's about something critically serious. And so I'm really delighted with it. I think it's a fabulous book. So we'll talk about that fully at the book club in 3 weeks. But tonight, I want to talk a lot about some of the work that Bryan's done, which kind of got him to the point where he realized that he needed to tell a slightly different way. I find it slightly different, a broader way of telling these important stories, and that's why he's moved into writing fiction. And Bryan and I met, I have to say, a couple of years ago, a year and a half ago, I guess, wandering around at the bottom of the earth. And we both happened to be on our respective honeymoons, which was odd. And we started talking about books, and well, you know what happens once you start talking about books. But it's so I'm delighted that he's with us, and so at the end we'll talk. I'll ask Bryan some questions, and then if you have questions, either let Nancy know, or let Nancy be watching the chat, and you can put your questions on chat, and then when we get, I hope maybe 45 minutes in, we can have, if you have questions, you can ask them. Okay, so I have a whole bunch of questions to ask you, Bryan, but I have to say first, if you Google Bryan even a little bit, one of the first pictures that will come up is a picture of Bryan in high school with an enormous snake around his neck. It's a hilarious picture. And what remind me, because I know you told me over dinner one night, but how did the snake thing happen? This is just to sort of warm things up. How did your love of snake?
I grew up in South Jersey, and in my neighborhood growing up, all the kids collected toads and frogs and lizards the way normal kids collect baseball cards. And on our street, if you caught a snake, you were a king. And I also learned pretty quickly that you could take a snake to school and they would stop class for you and you could get out of class for a whole day. So beginning literally in second grade and every year after that, through high school, I brought a snake to school and I got off the entire day. I'd get my best friend, Tom Berkey, to go with me, and we'd go around from school to school and talk about the snake. And over the years, I moved from snakes we caught in the yard to something called a Burmese python, now loose in the Everglades. And that snake in that photograph in the Millville Daily was named Socrates. Socrates got me out of a lot of classes.
And yet, was your friend with you in the picture?
Yeah, yep, it's my best friend, and my brother was there too.
Wow. Well, he looks particularly uncomfortable. That's why I
was he was very scared.
He just looks like he's just wants to scream. It's just a fabulous picture. Okay, let's. I want to. Well, let me talk. Maybe the best way to do this is that Bryan did a kind of an amazing thing when he was studying and trying to investigate elephants. And this, I think, might be a kind of a long story, but I think it's a story worth telling. Can you talk to us a little bit about the tusks? You know, how you hit on the idea of the tusks, and how that has sort of developed over the years. I do want to make sure and ask you about where things are right now with various things. But why don't you tell the Tusk story? It's just kind of amazing.
Sure. Yeah, it was a really satisfying, gratifying project, and it brought together a huge National Geographic team to pull it off. We had just finished a 3-year investigation into ivory trafficking in general. And what we discovered was at least 25,000, possibly 50,000 elephants a year were being killed for their ivory. Most of it was going to China. And we did a cover story on that, and it was successful. It got a lot of attention. We got we exposed the role of religion in moving ivory, and police raided Vatican City as a result of that article. And we started to get, Hillary Clinton got involved, Secretary of State at the time, and we started to get movement on closing down China's ivory market. But what I realized in the wake of that article was that there was killing of elephants going on in Central Africa that wasn't explained by this basic market economics of we want to sell a valuable rare product that you can carve into something collectible and put on your mantelpiece. Something was happening in Central Africa. There's a level of violence that wasn't explained by that. And I was hearing reports that Joseph Kony, the terrorist head of the Lord's Resistance Army out of Uganda, was trading ivory for arms in the Congo. And I wanted to test that proposition. My first instinct was that was bullshit, that it was people trying to bring more attention to the ivory story. There was a time, post 9/11, the word terrorism has been used to sell a lot of projects. And the wildlife world's one of them. And so my first instinct was to test this because I doubt it's true. And then as I looked into it and got on the ground there in the Congo, turned out there's good evidence to support the idea that these guys were moving ivory. I met guys who were part of Kony, had escaped Kony's network and things. But how to get into Kony's network? Joseph Kony is he's the guy that as you know is famously has the child soldier kidnapping whole villages, of kidnapping the kids and the women to cook for him and basically become slaves. And it was just a horrible man operating in Central Africa. But how to get to him? The word was he was operating out of Darfur in Sudan, and I knew I couldn't. I was not comfortable putting together any kind of team that would go in there. I certainly couldn't do what I normally do, which is kind of try to integrate, meet the people who I think are the bad guy face to face and talk to them and try to get their story. That wasn't going to happen. So I asked myself, if this were a narcotics story, if this were Pablo Escobar, how might I approach it if I weren't a journalist? And the approach I would explore is I would take a suitcase of money and put a tracker in it, or I would take a suitcase of cocaine and try to get a suitcase of his cocaine and put a tracker in it. And so that led to the idea of, what if we had a taxidermist make us fake ivory and we put a tracker inside that ivory. And that was the beginning of the project. And I had just done a story for National Geographic on taxidermy, so I knew George Dante is one of the world's great taxidermists. Him as a connoisseur, and had connections with who put trackers on all sorts of creatures to find out where they go. And we brought those technologies together, and we made these perfect tusks that hand painted. They were about $20,000 a piece, and hand painted every line, every crack. And when you cut a tusk, a tusk is a tooth, and when you cut it, though, it sideways, it has rings just like the rings of a tree, called Schrager lines. And one of the things I had George do was hand paint those Schrager lines, and then he coated it with the same coating that NASCAR cars are painted with, so it could withstand a lot of damage. And we buried them. We did a variety of things to get them in a natural way into the stream of commerce in Central Africa. And they got picked up and walked the same route. We believe that Coney walked out of the Congo, and we were able to track the route that he was using up into Darfur. We brought that evidence to Congress, to Ed Royce, who was chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee at the time. And at the time, I think the U.S. had spent, I don't know how many hundreds of millions of dollars just for Coney. And our project was expensive, but it was tens of thousands of dollars. And we were able to geolocate a very likely spot for where he was operating. So that was the project, and it was very gratifying. We had involved. We brought in a private satellite company to help us take pictures on the ground of where the tusks were moving, and it was a Jason Bourne kind of operation.
Oh, wow. Well, and let's talk. Let's add one sort of personal part of it. When you were taking the tusks through the airport in Tanzania, because that's such a crazy story. And not only is the story itself crazy, but then you're meeting with the chief of police, who was also an accountant. It's so great.
So one of the side stories that, and I'm going to give you a little bit more background than is in the story, because I didn't share this at the time with many people, but so George, so picture an elephant tusk that you've seen, and we did a good sized elephant tusk might be 6 feet long. We wanted to make sure that our tusks got into the stream of commerce without being cut. We didn't want anybody discovering the electronics inside. So I chose a length that was commonly smuggled. So it's post-cut length of ivory that people could put in a backpack and ride on a motorbike, which is a common thing to do. For George to put these electronics inside this tusk that had to be perfectly balanced, he used ball bearings to counterweight the big battery that was inside, and so lithium battery to last a long time, and the antenna system that was inside. And so the night before I was about to put this in the field, we were in Tanzania, and I asked the team, listen, one more time, we wrapped the battery in steel, or in some, we secured the battery, right? And they said, what do you mean? I said, remember we discussed what happens if you cut into a lithium battery. And we wanted to be careful about that because that's what people do with ivory. They cut into it. And they said, no, we didn't do that. And I said, well, let's, and we started pulling up on our phones. You can Google what happens to a lithium battery if you cut into it. And it explodes. And they catch on fire. And I said, well, we have to call off the operation. By this time, we'd spent a lot of money, a lot of time. We'd flown over. We had a whole team there. And I said, we're done. I am not putting a bomb into the field. And I got pushback. I won't say who, but I got some pushback on that, oh, okay, why don't we get it? We've gone so far. Why don't we go ahead with it? And we'll just make an announcement on all the radio waves that we'll film this, and we'll tell everyone that there are fake ivory that could be dangerous. And anyway, so I said, no, we're taking these home. I'm not even leaving them in the country because I don't trust what might happen if they're here and I'm not. So we spent the night disfiguring the ivory, cutting into it. We only had little Leatherman saws. So and the product was very tough. And we spent hours and hours. This is me and Toby Strong from the BBC, and JJ Kelly, who's a famous director now. So we finally get the Tusk to a point where we think, okay, we can pass muster in case we get stopped at the airport. And we take them to the airport, and I say, okay, now the last thing, just in case, everybody put on their National Geographic baseball cap. And everyone put on their baseball cap, and we march through, and I've got the tusks in a big duffel bag. We put it in the chute to go through the X-ray machine, and it goes through, and it's that moment where you see people lean forward to the camera, the customs officials, and then it slides back into the machine, and the guy said, open that. And when we opened it, all hell broke loose. And sirens are going off, and they brought in all kinds of police and things. And I said, no, it's not ivory. It's fake. See how the cuts are? And they looked closer at the X-ray machine, and they said, half the guys said, no, this is ivory. And half the guys said, oh, look at the electronics. It's a bomb. And so, yeah, I was arrested, and the State Department got involved, and I spent the night there. And but I made a lot of friends with the people who arrested me, and they became some contacts later.
And I know you can't divulge how you actually got it into the field, but is that sort of thing still happening? I mean, are they still doing things like that, or you're not?
So people have taken that idea and run with it in a variety of ways. Those tusks ran for about 6 months, I think, the battery, and we end up discovering a new smuggling route that went into Sudan that hadn't been discovered before, and that was investigators have written me subsequently and said we were able to. We've added that to our repertoire of places we're looking at. Sadly, the U.S. gave up the hunt for Coney not long after a change of administrations and new priorities or no priorities, and so there was no progress on that front. But a number of wildlife investigations have come up with some really creative things to put trackers in since then, and so there have been nice little offshoots from that project.
Well, just because you brought up Coney and his wonderful life-giving organization, the Lord's Resistance Army, I had a little list of the Fab Five. These five guys that you've sort of been focused on: Coney and Anson Wong and John Hume and Hugo Ross and is it Dowie Grunwald? Is that how you say his last name?
Yeah.
So what's the current status of those five clowns? I mean, they're really five of the most heinous people I've ever read about. I mean, it just...
well, Coney we've talked about. Anson, after my story ran, Anson was my first kingpin we went after, and it was a sort of changed everything for National Geographic. They started going after kingpins. We called it the kingpin to signal that's what I want to do. And Anson, shortly after that story ran, he's operating in Malaysia, but he was trafficking snow leopards and panda bear skins and rare birds, everything. We did a cover story on him, and he got caught. He was moving through the airport in Kuala Lumpur not long after the story ran, and the lock on his suitcase broke. And even though he's a major figure, he was smuggling some vipers and some other things in his own suitcase. And because the story was so public, they arrested him, and he was tried for the first time in Malaysia. And they gave him just 6 months. He kind of used his influence, I imagine, and the public outcry over that was so bad that they retried him, and he got 5 years, which was huge. So that was Anson, and Davi was a rhino. Sorry.
Let me for just a second.
All right.
About the story of Anson has that incredible woman who you met and talked to over and over, who was a minister of, in other words, the person who ought to be least interested in this guy, and she was like his best friend.
Correct.
I mean, it was just incredible.
Yeah.
We've got to go to National Geographic and read all this stuff. It's just unreal. Really unreal. But yeah, so sorry. Okay, but he's not still in jail. He's probably running a country club.
He's out. There are bigger guys operating in Malaysia now, but my understanding is he's still in the reptile game. A lot of people have distanced themselves from him in the United States, and I don't really keep track of him much. No, they're making a movie out of the book, The Lizard King. A24 is a good studio. They picked it up. So
that's exciting. Wow.
Yeah.
And then the other three guys, Hugo Ross. Now, he's, and then you took his name, used it, part of it in the book, right? And is he sort of the model for that guy? I didn't know. I assumed it might be.
He inspired a character in the book named Ross Botha. Hugo Ross is, by all accounts, is a very bad man. He's been involved in. He's accused of heading a rhino trafficking, poaching syndicate. He's South African, but he's run girls and drugs and weapons and diamonds to Sierra Leone and Charles Taylor, and he's done a lot of bad things. And I got to know him. He was in prison at the time, and I went to visit him. And from prison, he had a multitude of cell phones, and we stayed in contact. And I went back to visit him a number of times and met his family. And he was just sentenced 3 days ago to 29 years in prison for, by Hugo Ross standards, a very minor set of crimes involving weapons possession. And I think he tried to sell a boat that wasn't his. But he was the guy that he was the Trump kid's go-to outfitter for hunting. So Don Jr. and Eric, and according to Hugo, also Ivanka, came over to hunt. I don't know if she hunted, but came, and he was their guy.
So what did he do? What were they hunting?
Oh, they hunted everything. Lion, in particular. They hunted elephants. That the one hunt I know a good deal about. They didn't get an elephant, but some members of their hunting group, some of their friends, killed an elephant and had the feet. No, killed a white rhino. Killed a white rhino and had the feet made into furniture, like a table lamp and that kind of stuff.
Jeez. And is the Grunewald, is he in jail? The Grunewald? Grunewald?
Yeah, Grunewald. He is not. He's a very wealthy guy. He's a rhino hunt outfitter. He was accused of trafficking in rhino horn in South Africa, and he was bringing over. He's wanted in the United States. He used to come over here and do the big hunting shows, kind of like the gun shows, but for hunters, and sell hunts. You'd come over for 100,000, 50, depending on what you, and what you do. And Americans kill rhino, and then he was trafficking the horns to the Vietnamese. So last I checked, there's an Interpol red notice out on, or no, there is a U.S. Warrant out for him, but that again fell under the Trump years, and I don't think there was any movement on that. And Hume, the other name you mentioned, is just a guy that raises rhinos like cattle to cut the horns off and sell them. And our work exposed that there's a dark side to, and he's connected to Grunewald.
Talk about the whole idea of these guys who raise them on farms, raise rhinos on farms, and and whether, I remember somebody asking you in some interview about whether that's a reasonable way to do things because it may lessen the illegal traffic. And
right. It's a.
But
yeah. So unlike elephants get one set of tusks for their lifetime. If you have to kill them to get them, they're canine teeth basically. Rhinos, with the rhino horn, is keratin, made kind of like hair, dense. But if you cut it off, it will grow back. So people have begun in large numbers raising rhino on their farms, like dairy cattle, and going out every 2 years, starting them, and then cutting the horn off and letting them go, and then letting the horn grow back up. And the idea is, look, it's not great, but it's better than killing them. And it gets complicated, but the simple answer is that when you allow this, the legalization of something that's, they spend a lot of money to raise these animals up, and just next door is a wild one. And if you legalize that trade without having security to protect the whole stream of commerce, any guy with a gun is going to walk in and kill the wild one and sell it for the same money that the ranchers. And these ranchers they're not paying to protect all rhino. They're paying to protect theirs, and then they're selling it to the Vietnamese, who are being exploited at that end with beliefs that rhino horn cures cancer and that sort of thing. And so it's a corrupt system. The politicians involved and the government regulators involved are corrupt. And so it's this, in an ideal world, you could conceive of something theoretically that would work, where you're cutting these horns off and selling it. But of course, at the end use, you're giving people fraudulent medicine. So there's no end of it that is justifiable to me.
And what is the situation with rhino horns? Did they is South Africa able to sell, freely to Vietnam and to China?
So some of these guys you mentioned put a lot of money into lobbying and suing the government on constitutional grounds and forcing it to allow the domestic sale of rhino horn. So I'm not current to, because there's been a lot of changes, but I believe this circumstance in South Africa is these guys who have a lot of money in ranching rhino forced a Supreme Court case that declared it legal to sell rhino horn in South Africa. Now, there is no market for rhino horn in South Africa. It's all for the Vietnamese and primarily Asian market. And so these guys, and they said it to me openly, we intend this product to be smuggled. We just want it legal on our end, and then we're going to rely on these guys to smuggle it out. So it's a very you have to be very cynical to be a part of that.
Wow. Yeah. Well, and that goes to something that I think and I know I've heard you speak about. This sort of the role of autocratic governments and the role of governments generally in looking the other way with all of this stuff, because some people are getting their pockets lined, I'm assuming, and then that also leads, when you mentioned this with Coney, selling, getting arms for ivory, so there's a whole terrorist element to all of this. How does anybody, even if you wanted to control this stuff, how do you do it?
You mean how do you protect the elephants?
How do you protect rhinos and elephants when there's so many layers of people who are benefiting from it in some hideous way? What do you do?
Well, so I asked myself that question, and I was a Washington lawyer, and I'm a criminal investigator, and I said, what can I do? And I designed stories. I knew I had the platform in National Geographic. I knew that I could tell stories that the world would see. And so I designed stories that focused on the criminals and the human cost of the ivory trade. And instead of telling these stories that are kind of animal-based that make you feel sad, I identified the government officials, et cetera, and brought in a priest, Monsignor, who was who confessed to being a pedophile, and was an ivory collector. And I put these are basically pockets of energy, and I put them into my story, hoping and believing that these stories could make a difference. And in fact, and Hillary Clinton picked this up, and a number of governments picked it up. The Philippines, the Department of Wildlife in the Philippines picked up this story and said, we want to do something about this. And they had both a good reason for saying that and a kind of selfish reason. They were having to pay to protect these ivory storerooms, and it was costing them a lot of money. They wanted to stop that. And they started burning ivory, and they had these burns around the world of big ivory collections. You may have seen in Times Square, we did one, and that's all connected. And it all put pressure on China, and China finally announced we are going to close our domestic ivory market. we're going to close our ivory market. And that's the demand side of this question. It's all because the stories were told, and sort of the light was shown on this world. And so there are ways to make a difference. And that's the poaching in East Africa has dropped dramatically as a result of, and people could take, I'm not taking credit for it, but for sure, the story gave a concrete thing for people to take to their congressman or take to, the ministry in Beijing and say, this is a problem. So there are ways. Story. That's why I'm so, I'm thrilled to be talking story with you. A person who appreciates stories well told and understands the power of them, because it's more than just entertainment.
Right. Well, and I was just listening to you say that. I was thinking, yes, that's right, because if I read a story about an elephant or a rhinoceros or a dolphin, I'm sad, but sad doesn't frequently translate into action. Sad just makes me sad. Whereas I read movies and I am furious.
Right.
And because they're people you can focus your anger on. These smug birds who are just, oops, sorry, Nancy, who are just, standing there being, here's my antelopes that I'm standing in front of. And, I killed those, by the way. And, you just want to punch these people. And I haven't punched anybody since 6th grade. It's just, you just get into this fury about this. So it's a brilliant idea. So is that, I don't know. I was trying to think about a way to ask this question about investigating. How you landed at this. You have an uncle who was an FBI agent, right? Is that correct?
I do.
And,
yep.
and sort of, how did you decide? Was it your innate sense of what a story should be, and part of that was because you had been trained in the law, how to attack a story, to frame a story, to shape a story, and find out what they did and how to pursue them, or was it what brought you to investigating in the way that you did? Because I think there's a direct link from that to becoming a novelist, but it's just
yeah. So I'm going to take that apart into two questions. The way I learned to be an investigator was 100% the training of my uncle, who was an FBI undercover agent, one of the pioneering long-term undercover agents. So he went in a single identity, mob related, for 5 years, back when no one understood what that could do. He and Joe Pistone, who was the Donnie Brasco character, were the two kind of pioneers at the same time. It screwed people up pretty seriously, including my uncle. And he had been my hero as a boy, and was kind of a mystery. He disappeared from the family. And when he heard I was out at the Iowa Writers Workshop for the summer and having trouble finding a place for my first novel, this is 20 years ago. And he said, why don't you come see me? I'll tell you my story and see if it'll help you. And in the course of his telling me what happened to him, I said, well, I got to meet some of these people. And he said, fucking no. I've spent my life trying to forget them. And I said, well, and finally for my benefit, he said, I'll help you. I'll introduce you to my partner and various guys. And one by one, I started meeting these guys, good and bad. And he said, you kind of have a knack for this. Why don't we, if you want to continue to investigate other stories, I'll train you. And that's how that started. The second part of that is then how do you tell the story? And there, I'm very fortunate for having been a Washington D.C. lawyer, because bottom line, you're advocating with every brief. I wasn't writing court case briefs. I was writing briefs for companies that wanted to influence Congress. So how to tell a story in a way that forces or enables change was all I did, and I was trained by some of the best of the best on how to do that. And so when it came time to, I almost didn't. It was second nature to me, and it wasn't until I met some other journalists and some photographers who just sort of told stories flat, without any notion of only taking stories that could make a difference. And I was like, I'm putting 2 or 3 years into a story because I want to make a difference. I don't give a shit about, getting how many stories I get to tell, or how, well known I am or something. I wanted stories that I prosecuted stories, and I wanted a conviction.
Yeah. No, it's so great. I mean, because that's exactly what the stories feel like. And you start rooting around on the internet. That's why I asked you the question about these guys. Like, where are they now? Because you just want them all to be, sitting in some cell with somebody beating them in the face with something, preferably something hard. But I also love the fact that you said that when you presented this to the National Geographic, and their response was, "We don't do crime."
Sure. Yeah.
Well, so your persistence in that, opened up a whole door to them that turns them into a much more activist. That's what they ought to be doing, for Pete's sakes. It's not stories.
I said to them, of course you do. Every time you call an animal an endangered species, you're putting a chalk line around its body. That's your victim. You just aren't putting the villain in the story. So if let's flip it. Let's flip, instead of these victim-based things that, as you say, make you feel sad, let's make them villain-based and make you feel mad. And my theory was that mad leads to action. It worked out.
Yeah, you're right. So the obvious question then from that is, what do we do? What do people, what are the 5 most important things that people could do? Oh, and I also want to talk about a free press too. But let's, what are what? Because it's so big. I mean, as you've said, and I've heard you say it many times, that everything is connected. This web of, a bad decision about letting, timber get taken down in the Amazon or anywhere, affects everything eventually.
Yeah. We're not sure of the cause, but a bad bat bite, or we don't know what the cause of the pandemic is, but there are reasonable theories. There's enough to support, certainly SARS and Ebola, that we have animal vectors for wild animal, and it's because we exploit. So I mean, people are dying by the millions now because of likely because of an animal exploitation situation. But I mean, so what became clear to me as I was doing these kinds of villain-based stories was that these animal stories, people like to read animal stories. They don't like to have animals hurt, which is another reason. I mean, as the first rule in fiction or writing about animals is you cannot kill that animal. If you kill that animal, you're out. Well, that's whether you're a novelist or whatever. So I worked very hard to. What's that?
I said, tell Bambi's mother that. Yeah, but that's okay.
Okay. Well, you're taking a big risk.
I know. Absolutely.
And it helps to be a cartoon. But you know, a lot of people, animals bring people to the table in ways that other victims don't. And what I started doing, without telling anyone really, I started choosing animal stories to address human stories, so terrorism in Africa. I wanted to get at terrorism, not in the United States, which of course is a growing problem, but no one, you know, I was noticing during my trips to Africa, horrible things were happening. Terrorist acts were happening constantly, but we didn't think of them as terrorism. When I would describe them to people when I came home, they said, "Well, that's not terrorism. That's in Africa." What the hell? What are you talking about? And it made me realize our sense of terrorism, it has to be a threat to us for us to think that's, or people like us. And if it's, you know, African against African, that doesn't fit that scenario. So one reason I went after Coney was to use the word terrorism with a story that did not involve Americans, and help to educate people subconsciously almost about the notion of terrorism, expand that definition. And I did that with some other projects. I wanted to talk about corruption and the commodification of nature in the rhino. I didn't want to. Rhinos were just a vehicle to talking about what it is to take nature out of an ecosystem as they were as farmers, and then manipulate it and turn it into property. And what does that mean? So that's what I was really doing in these stories. But I haven't really told anyone that before.
Yeah, that whole commodification thing is just sickening. I mean, it's just, I don't know. Before I get to the next couple of things, because we're running out of time, of course, does anybody have a question they want to ask Bryan? Because I want to jump and try to get a little bit about the book. Any question? I didn't look at the chat. No? Nancy's looking.
Yep. Mike Smith is wondering about the connection between tusks and the Vatican.
Sure. So what we discovered in that project was that ivory for centuries has been a choice medium of all religions because of its purity, its rarity, the intricacy that you can carve with it. But we found an extraordinary number of crucifixes through history, in particular, but also the Madonna, the Santo Nino in the Philippines, and I had video of an ivory crucifix on the Pope's desk. And so I went to Vatican City, and there were 3 ivory shops there right across the street from the Vatican. And I engaged with those people and as a potential buyer, and they offered to sell me knowingly. They had a whole room. One of the places had a whole room of ivory crucifixes and ivory carvings, and they offered to smuggle. They knew it was illegal in the United States. They offered ways to get it over the United States, and also offered to have not the Pope, they clarified, but somebody senior in the Vatican bless, if I wanted, bless the crucifix before they sent it to me. So we exposed all that, and police raided those shops.
Wow. Larry, what did Larry ask?
Larry's wondering who's going to write and direct the film of The Lizard King.
Thanks. So there are 2 projects underway. One is a limited documentary series. The people involved in Tiger King are involved in that, not surprisingly, I guess. And the director for the film version of the book is still being discussed. There are a few names, but I think I'm not supposed to tell you. Yeah.
Probably a good idea. So all right. Well, let's ask the obvious question because in 3 weeks we're going to be focusing on this. But what was it in the middle of all of this wonderful stuff that you were doing and all this important stuff for National Geographic, crucial stuff actually, that you found yourself saying, okay, this is the moment when I'm going to become a novelist?
Well, it was sort of a perfect storm. I had always intended to be a novelist. I went to law school because I was afraid to be a writer. I was afraid to tell my parents I want to write fiction, and I didn't know any fiction writers. I went to Penn State undergrad, and I didn't know any writers there, and I just proceeded building a lot of building blocks for an impregnable life. And it turns out, art's a vulnerable life, and it took me a long time to build up the courage to make that adjustment. And I was at a good point with Geographic. I understood storytelling. I understood that there were only a few species left in my view of using species to change the world, really. A few species left that had the power with the public to make a difference. And I thought, that's not, I'll leave that to somebody else to do. Hopefully somebody else is going to figure this out and do this stuff. So far, nobody has. Ian Urbina in the New York Times has been doing phenomenal stuff on, the Hungry Ocean, the oceans stuff, but pretty much no one else is doing things. And, you're on a clock with creativity. You can't keep pursuing nonfiction. You're going to lose so I built up enough experience. I had some wisdom for a change on, things that I thought needed to be said about how the world works. And I thought, if I don't do it now, I'm going to miss that. I'm going to miss that window.
Yeah. No, I get that completely. And that's, but I'm so glad you did, because it's just, it's an unusual take on a number of subjects, and it's a book that's scary as hell. I mean, it's a really scary book. I mean, in the right way, because it really makes you feel like, God, there are just people in the world that, because of the way the world has changed and what we're capable of doing, via all of the electronics and satellites, and the way that people can accumulate knowledge and specific knowledge, and it's unreal. But the book is so human too. I mean, and we were talking this afternoon about the beautiful way that you open the book with that chapter with the ranger and your protagonist, Tom Clay. Wait, did I say that right?
Yeah.
It's right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I suddenly thought, because there was a moment when I was reading the book that I gave him a different name somehow in my head. And so I'm always afraid I'm going to use the wrong name. That's just that first conversation, and then their trip up into the wild. You just learn so much about this guy, and it's so kind of terse but effortless, and doesn't feel, I mean, as much as I love Raymond Chandler, for instance, you can always kind of feel the mechanics of it as it's happening. And this was kind of the book kept surprising me all the time, which I loved. And nothing's worse than meeting somebody, not knowing they're a writer. We started talking about John le Carré. We both know John le Carré, blah, blah, blah. And Bryan suddenly says, oh, yeah, well, I'm just about finished with my first book. And I'm going, oh, fuck, I own a bookstore. Oh! I got all the way through, what is it, 656? Oh, well. My apologies to all concerned for using the F word. But I thought, oh, what if the book isn't any good? He's going to expect me to sell it as my bookstore. how embarrassing. And then it turns out to be right. So it's just, don't start barking. Oops. Man, I didn't mean to use the F word. I'm sorry. Come here. Come here now. Come. I know. I woke you up by pounding. Never mind. We'll just forget about it. Uh-oh. Helen's going to yell at you. But so, come here. Stop it.
So Bryan,
As an animal lover,
Let's talk.
how do you that people use the word self-care. How do you either not murder someone, or how do you not go crazy or just curl up in a ball after these horrible people that you've come in contact with and things that you've seen?
yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and it's one I explore for the protagonist, Tom Clay, in the book, because I don't have there's no great answer. It's definitely affected me, and it's affected me interacting with them. It's affected me coming home to bureaucracies in the publishing world that don't understand what I'm trying to do, and having to fight my way through things on the home front, and people who are supposed to be part of my team. That is, not as glamorous as what Clay goes through, but that's part of it too. I think the mix, I grew up in a funeral home, so you kind of trained from before you're born to focus on the thing in front of you and the humanity of the people around you, and try to find the good of people and circumstances. Humor is really, really helpful. There's kind of that gallows humor that EMTs and surgeons and everybody seems, and you kind of develop that as well, for sure.
You brought it all into the book, and the book is sometimes quite funny, but it is morally complicated, and as it should be, but it's a book that I think is really positive, which is what I love about it. It's you. And now let's just hope that there aren't too many Terry Kriegers in the world, because he's, boy, that's a great villain. I mean, that's a really great villain. That's his name. Am I getting that name
Terry
right?
Krieger, yeah. Sadly, I didn't have to stretch my imagination too far,
I'm sorry to say I'm sure that's true. God. Okay, well, we better close this down, but thank you so much
Oh,
for
James,
this.
that's been great.
And I can't wait to have people talk to you about the book in 3 weeks. And please, if you haven't read it, read it now. We still have some book plate autographed copies at the store, a few left. So I think, is that true, Nancy? Did I speak that? Yes.
And I bet Bryan would send us more.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd be happy to. Yeah.
So
And we can, I can, inscribe a plate if you want to. You have to.
nice. So June 16th, 6 p.m. Central Time, and the link is on our events page on the website. So if we knew that we couldn't do the book club in 1 hour. That's why we had to have a 2-part series here. So hopefully you'll all join us again, and I guess this gives you time too, if you think of a question that you wished you'd ask Bryan tonight, that you can do that next month.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Bryan. Bless you.
Yeah, thank you, guys. Good night.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.